And right now, we are going to move into our first panel, Social Enterprise for the Environment, Responding to Climate Change, Restoring Ecosystems. And I'm going to turn it over right now to Bryan Young of Transition Salt Springs. So take it away, Bryan.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Mitch. It's really great to be here. A couple of years ago, the forum that was on Gallian, or was it? It was Pender. I didn't have an opportunity to present or be there. So it's really great to be participating in the panel today. So once again, I'm Bryan Young. I am of Quebecois and BC settler heritage, and I have been living in the unceded Sinchothan and Hokominum speaking territories here on South Salt Spring. And it's really exciting to be with you here today. I look forward to a rich conversation with our panelists. Just by way of preamble, before we get going and before we fully really introduce ourselves, it's becoming clear to more and more people that business as usual approaches are simply going to be insufficient in our collective response to the climate crisis. Former Premier Rachel Notley famously 3 years ago called out Salt Springers for believing in unicorns when it comes to taking the bold moves necessary to transition as quickly as possible to a net zero economy. And it was in the context of the Trans Mountain Pipeline protests, which were raging hot at the time. She said, maybe on Salt Spring you can build an economy on condos and coffee shops, but not in Edmonton and not anywhere in Alberta. Here in Alberta, we ride horses, not unicorns. And I invite pipeline opponents to saddle up on something that's real. So I think what's special about our islands is the richness of alternative thinking and alternative models for doing things more sustainably, more equitably, and in ways that acknowledge the centrality of community in our response to climate change. What's simply not real right now is a zero carbon economy. That's simply a requirement to protect human and non-human communities as climate change accelerates. What is real are the solutions that are being developed right here in our backyards on the islands we all share that could form part of a new way of thinking about economy, thinking of its Latin roots, which really mean household, to help us survive and indeed thrive in the challenging decades to come. So while unicorns may be imaginary, imagination is an ingredient sorely needed if we're going to maintain viable communities where social equity, ecological health, and community happiness can be at the center in spite of the climate risks we're now facing from rising oceans, volatile weather, fire risks, and more. We will need the kind of imagination that generates vision, aplenty for what an economy and a community and our ecosystems will look like in the coming years. So we've assembled a panel of creative thinkers, doers, and community builders for whom climate action is a central motivating factor and value to what they do. They represent a range of islands across our wonderful archipelago in various sectors, including transportation, tourism, ecoforestry, and not cradle to grave manufacturing, but what you'll come to know as cradle to cradle manufacturing. So business as usual is not the prescription you're going to hear about here. In fact, once we're done at 11 a.m., I'm really hoping that we will have a bit of a cocktail napkin sketch for what a new zero carbon economic sustainability strategy will look like for our islands in the decades to come. So, but before we do get started in earnest, let's just introduce ourselves. I am, once again, Bryan Young. I'm the chair of something called Transition Salt Spring. We worked 18 months to publish the Salt Spring Island Climate Action Plan, and it's now really driving everything we do here on Salt Spring. And we've got a lot of projects going on. You can take a look at transitionsaltspring.com to find out more. And in fact, in the Q&A session after this session, feel free to ask any questions you want, because we want people to copy this plan in their own communities so that we can really do a heave-ho on these islands with respect to climate action. I also, by the by, I have a 25-year background in renewable energy and conservation, electricity conservation program design back in Ontario. So for the first person I'm going to introduce is Michelle Kresniak. She's the manager at Gabrielle's Recycling Center, involved in environmental education with kids, and is the partner in crime with Faye Weller, in the creation of C2C threads, which upscale some of that mountain of clothing that's no doubt coming into the recycling center in Gabriola. And Faye, aside from running C2C threads with Michelle, is a co-founder of Gertie. And I'm dumb me, I didn't know what Gertie was until last night. I heard the acronym in our chat a few days ago, but I had to Google it after, and it was wonderful. What I learned is that it's a very innovative community-run bus system on Gabriola. It's the only one of its kind in Canada. And Faye is also a spark behind several other community initiatives on Gabriola, including, interestingly, an investment co-op, something we have here in Salt Spring as well. Chris Hall, going to Chris Hall. Chris Hall dumped City Life for Pender Island in 2014, starting out with a job managing Poets Cove Resort there, and most recently spearheading Aqualink, a pilot water taxi service that ran September into October, connecting the Southern Gulf Islands, all of the residents, businesses, and visitors. I took it, it was awesome, and I really hope we can get that built as a public service to increase the connectivity on our islands. Chris Lombard is a builder on Cortez, focused on designing and building net zero energy homes using natural materials and passive systems. He also manages the community forest on Cortez, which is a 50-50 partnership between the Clahoose First Nation and the Cortez Community Forest Co-op. Lastly, and certainly not leastly, is my colleague on the Economic Development Commission here on Salt Spring, with Jason Griffin, who is the owner of Tour Salt Spring, a nearly carbon neutral tour company, which recently was awarded a gold rating from Green Tourism Canada. Jason is shepherding the company towards offering more experiential visits to his clients, with a strong emphasis on learning experiences that focus on the themes of sustainability, conservation, and social issues. So we've got a good cross-section here of our economy on these islands, and let's just dive right in with maybe the first question to get the conversation going. Maybe each of you, and the question I'll ask, will basically take a couple of minutes to tell us about your work, really kind of flesh it out a little bit, and how it contributes to addressing the climate crisis, and how it fits within that. And we'll get to some other questions later about vision. But maybe starting, I'll go randomly. Let's start with Chris. Do you want to open us up this morning?
Yeah, sure. So as Bryan said, my name is Chris Hall, and I'm on Pender Island here. And yeah, I started out on Pender working for Poets Cove, which is where I got involved with the Southern Gulf Islands Tourism Partnership. Francine, I see there. Hi, Francine, is one of the creators that kind of brought me on board with that. And yeah, I was sitting as a board member there, and recently left Poets Cove and took on a contract to do a pilot project called Aqualink, which is a water taxi scheduled system to connect our Gulf Islands with a foot passenger transportation system. Anyone who's lived on the islands for a long time knows it's not always the easiest to get from island to island. BC Ferries does a decent job at getting people to Victoria and Vancouver on scheduled routes, but I know from my early days going over to Salt Spring for work at the beginning of this contract, it was always a 9-hour day through Victoria there and back to make it worthwhile to be on Salt Spring, which is about a 20-minute direct shot from my house in a boat. So it's a long day for how close we are. So in terms of climate change, obviously operating boats isn't the most environmental, but getting people using a foot passenger ferry as opposed to taking your cars and multiple ferries to get to where you need to go, I think will be beneficial. And we'll probably get into it more later, but have lots of plans for goods and services and other uses for the water taxi that will connect our islands, and encourage people to go on as a foot passenger. Bikes are available to go on the boats. People can take their bikes to travel around the islands as an alternative to automobiles as well. So we're excited with how the pilot project went, and the feedback that we've gotten from locals as well as tourists. It was surprisingly used a lot more by locals than it was by tourists as a tourism industry, which was interesting. So yeah, we wrapped up about 2 weeks ago. So there's a lot of interesting data to go through and digest and put together. And we're hoping to secure a little bit more funding to continue the pilot project next spring as well, to be back to operating again. So
Fingers crossed and toes crossed as well. But it's great, Chris. Maybe go over to you, Michelle. Maybe we'll do sort of Michelle followed by Faye, so we can get kind of the full meal deal with respect to C2C threads and what you folks are doing and how you feel it connects to climate action.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. First, we'd like to say with gratitude and respect that we are on the unceded territory of the Tsuut'ina people. I'm the general manager at the Gabriela Island Recycling Organization, GIRO, a really major hub on the island for not just recycling, but also for reuse of materials, housewares, clothing. So when the pandemic hit us back in 2020, some of our services got shut down. And one of those in particular that really had an impact was the textile waste that we received. We've been stockpiling about 40,000 pounds of textile waste since the pandemic started. It was getting sent overseas to secondhand clothing markets or landfilled, and both of those outcomes Faye and I were not happy to continue with. So we started researching the fashion industry, and what we discovered in terms of the environmental impact and impact on developing communities was really staggering. So we decided we were going to have to rethink this waste stream. And, you know, GIRO is a transfer station. It's a middleman dealing with many, many different ranges of materials that we pack, bale, and ship out to another larger transfer station. And then they do the same thing and create bigger bales and send it even further away. So the idea of keeping hold of one of these waste streams on the island and actually thinking about turning it into something else that could be usable goods that had value, this was a whole new concept for Gabriela. So we started brainstorming and engaged the community to see what they thought of the idea of turning this waste stream into something else. And yeah, I'll let Faye take over and share a bit more of what happened next.
Okay, and before I dive into that, just a comment on the community buses. There's actually community buses that have started up across the islands. There's a coalition, there's ones from Hornby, etc. So just wanted to put a plug in for all those other islands that are doing that. So just to continue with the textile, one of the interesting facts that we learned when we were doing our research was that the production of clothes and shoes produces more greenhouse gas emissions than international flights and marine traffic combined, which is a lot. So we were trying to think, how can we reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and the pollution created by the manufacturing of textiles and the subsequent discard of those textiles? So from our brainstorming and looking at the facts and looking what's happening around the world, C2C Threads was born. C2C means cradle to cradle, and cradle to cradle describes the infinite circulation of material. So it's reuse, repair, repurpose. So this is in direct contrast to the current way in which the textile system, actually most systems work, which is take resources, produce, make, and then waste, throw it away. So we're trying to do things in a different way. Go ahead, Marcia. Yeah.
So since November 2020, we applied for and were awarded funding with the RDN, our local district. And we've also since then received more funding from the Island Coastal Economic Trust, ICT. And this funding has supported a feasibility study to research potential products that we could create from the waste stream. We held a designers event with the community to showcase some of the community's amazing designs and prototypes that they thought would be, really potentially excellent products that we could make. We chose 3 products: an acoustic sound panel, stuffed applications such as dog beds and footstools or ottomans, as well as unpaper towels. So any kind of product that would replace a single-use product. So these are now actually being made by these contractors and sold locally, and they'll soon be available on an online store that we're creating. And we also heard from the community a strong interest that they would like to have access to some kind of space where they could use as a maker space, where they could rent stations and also incubate entrepreneurs themselves. So we've been redesigning this building plan to include this makerspace component as well. And our aim is to create a culture that spreads beyond Gabriola. And as Faye mentioned, we really want to be encouraging repair, reuse, repurpose, rather than buying new and throwing away, and therefore reducing greenhouse gas emissions and providing hopefully a much more sustainable future for not just Gabriola, but other islands that want to replicate this template.
Wow, wonderful. It's so inspiring, you two. It's amazing. I love, so far we have a transportation sector, and maybe we can get some electric boats in the future to have, you know, much lower footprint travel, aside, you know, in addition to encouraging pedestrian and cycling travel. And then, you know, I look forward to getting some duds from Gabriola, and maybe we can be syndicating this idea over here, because I know it was brutal. They're starting to accept fabric again at our recycling center, but it, you know, we have a few bags in our basement of old office clothes that we don't use anymore. So maybe going over to you, Mark. So what, you know, tell us about your corner of this economic universe.
Sure, good morning. Nice to be here. Thanks for hosting, Bryan and Mitch. I'm on Cortez Island, and this is Klahoose First Nation, unceded traditional territory. And I think the main reason that I've been invited today was for my work with the Cortez Community Forest Partnership. And that partnership is a 50-50 partnership between the Klahoose First Nation and the Community Forest Cooperative on Cortez. And together they formed a partnership to apply for and manage the community forest license on Cortez Island. I think we were the 49th community forest awarded in the province. And just for people who aren't super familiar with community forest, most of the forest land in BC is publicly owned. And most of those areas are managed by large companies, forest licenses or timber forest licenses. But there is a program for woodlots. So small owner operators can have a woodlot. And then there's a new program that's probably 15 years old. Well, actually, I think it might even be a little bit older than that for community forests. So there's about 60 community forests in the province that are basically areas of public land that are managed locally. And Cortez Island has a real conservation focus for our forestry goals. And so we are recognized as probably the licensee on Crown land that's cutting the least as a percentage of our allowable cut. And that's because our board of directors and our founders and current staff believe that the rate of harvest in BC's forest is a little bit too high, or a lot too high, or exceedingly too high, depending how you look at it, with respect to the, you know, the concurrent threats of climate change, and also the loss of habitat and the serious biodiversity loss that we're seeing. So our operation is harvesting. Currently, we're harvesting 10 to 15% of what we believe the mean annual increment of the forest is. So how much the forest grows, 15 to 20% maybe, so that we can age the forest and get back to some older forests. So it's a really challenging project because forestry is based on first cost economics. So everything's really expensive. So the more you log, the more you amortize your fixed costs. So we're working to derive value from the community forest that's not just depending on selling logs or as many logs as we can. So we've just completed a new faller training program. So we've trained 3 Cortez Islanders to become certified fallers, and we've been designing our projects to tailor demand for logs to the local mills that are part of the value added sector on Cortez Island, and trying to create firewood availability for the island. And we've applied for some funding, and we're going to be offering training, you know, forest fire training and OFA level 3 training for all the contractors working in the community forests to try to build up that capacity. My other background side of things, which I've been doing for the last 15 years, is I helped start the Sustainable Building Center in Vancouver. And I worked as a green building consultant in Vancouver. And since moving to Cortez, I've been a design build contractor, and I design and build net zero energy houses with a focus on passive technologies and passive strategies and natural buildings. So a lot of earth and plaster and chip slip, that kind of thing. So that's me and what I've been up to.
Fun stuff. I first ran into Mark. We had a workshop in the spring on blue and green carbon and the opportunities that are there for basically nurturing the sequestration of marine carbon, that's the blue carbon, and on the land, the terrestrial-based carbon being the green carbon, of course. So there's a lot of stuff there in terms of policy that needs to change in order for this to become actually viable. So I look forward to getting to that in our next question when we talk about, what are some of the, the warts and wounds that we've all experienced in developing our initiatives. But Jason, turn to my colleague, Jason Griffin. Tell us, what's your connection? How do you see your connection of your business with where, with the climate crisis? What's the interplay there for you?
Yeah, so a little bit about my business, Tour Salt Spring. I do land-based tours on Salt Spring Island. And I've always incorporated my own interests in the tours and sort of expose people to the environmental aspects and initiatives happening on Salt Spring Island and people who are involved in that sort of thing. That's kind of where my passion is. Yeah, we've been for a few years now actually been certified with the gold rating from Green Tourism Canada. So we've got one of the old dirty buses that I've converted, so it uses straight vegetable oil, and another van on veggie oil, and the newer van has enough. It's a plug-in hybrid, has enough battery range to do our wine tours that we recharge with our solar panels. Yeah, we're trying to get more into. The focus has been seeing how Salt Spring increasingly has it's been exceeding its limits for infrastructure, and sort of what is practical on a small island in terms of both the infrastructure but just environmentally. So we're trying to reduce the number of people that bring their vehicles over, so we do ferry pickups and pickup at accommodations, trying to have people visit the island that don't need to bring their car with them and can take the ferry and that sort of thing. So we're trying to promote that more, and we're also doing more going forward, that we're trying to package tours and incorporate different experiential either workshops or visits, different hosts that we can design a vacation for someone or a group. And we've done a number of these for different tour operators that we've contracted with, where we keep people here for several days and they get more immersed in Salt Spring and what it's all about. And so, yeah, we're hoping to go forward and go more in that direction, and seeing Salt Spring and the Gulf Islands as a place where we can share the knowledge that we have of these different things and share it not only amongst ourselves locally, but also be a place that people come to experience this, and hopefully it'll be an inspiration and a learning experience that people will then spread elsewhere like a virus.
Yeah, and to continue maybe the analogies with a negative tinge, in some ways you can see yourself as taking people, absconding people and taking them to re-education camps and then sending them out there. So we definitely need more of that. It's awesome. And Jason and I have been involved in conversations around basically what would it be like to have the Gulf Islands be a hub for sustainable education, that people can come to learn the skills, all across the spectrum, for building a new economy, the new economy we're going to need to make it work. And you're going to be hearing about some of the vision. I mean, a lot of these people that I have the good fortune to be with here today have such vision around where we need to go. And I wanted to make sure we had a question about vision and what does it look like? Because having vision really helps us to fill in some of the dots along the way before they get connected. So thank you, Jason, and everybody. I mean, it's so compelling. So, but it's not easy, right? I mean, there are lots of challenges to reinventing ourselves, reinventing our economies. So I want to kind of dig into that a little bit about what some of the warts and wounds and bruises have been along the way. And, you know, maybe each of you think about too, what do we need that's different? So where my mind goes with my history or experience in policy development of the provincial government in Ontario, is policy. What rules do we need to change? What needs to happen? I think of Mark Lombard, for instance, in your work, and the carbon price needs to be not here, but there, in order to truly recognize the value of that carbon as it goes into the atmosphere. Some of you don't know, Bryan Penn did some, on our island, did some research into the emissions of forestry emissions in this province, and they're actually not included in the overall carbon tally that our province officially uploads so that Canada can count its emissions globally to keep up, you know, basically keep up with our international carbon commitments, which we're so far not keeping up to anyways. But what's interesting, you can look on the provincial database, and there are these lines at the bottom of the database that say not included in the overall calculation. And one of the biggest line items there is carbon emissions. And in the past many years, increasingly, it's forestry emissions that are the largest source of emissions in our province. And that's largely tied, and Mark, correct me if you think I'm wrong, to the industrial forestry that we've been doing and the fires that start in those wonderful dry, you know, patches of, you know, debris in the center of a clear cut. So there's a lot we need to do, and Mark is here because forestry is part of the solution. We're going to need a lot of forestry to not only house us, but also to keep our forests safer and make them more resilient to fire. So let's actually maybe I'll open that up, open that conversation with you, Mark, starting with you, talking about, taking a look at my notes here, make sure I don't miss anything. Yeah, what are the lessons learned that you've gleaned from this work so far in terms of its challenges? And, you know, if you're excited about some of the innovations you've been able to do to make something work, it would be awesome to hear about those too. But, you know, maybe too, if you can think about some of the policy directions we need to go in to make what you do mainstream, it would be awesome to hear that as well.
Yeah, sure, Brian. I would say that you're right about the forest fire and industrial forestry contributing as a net, making BC's forests have now swung to being net carbon emitters, which is remarkable because, you know, the Canadian and Russian boreal forests were the lungs, you know, in the Amazon, you know, the lungs of the earth for a long time, and now it's unfortunately tipped the other way. So as I said, for the community forests on Cortez, our goal is to, you know, to put ecosystem-based forestry first, and it's a bit of a nebulous term, ecosystem-based forestry. It's sort of one of the terms used along with sustainable forestry or you know, light touch forestry or ecoforestry that sort of denotes or implies a conservation focus. So with the community forests on Cortez, we have been trying a whole bunch of different harvesting systems. Most people, if you go for a drive on Vancouver Island, you know, you go up over the mountain range to the interior, out to the west coast, up to the north, you see big clear cuts and really big plantations. That's kind of the status quo. There are very, very few, you know, as a percentage, almost nil amount of selective logging or small logging. There, you know, there was the Wildwoods project near Cedar, you know, where one person had a woodlot and he was doing something a little bit different, a lighter touch, but, you know, that was like, you know, such a tiny percentage of the overall land base. So what we're doing on Cortez is we've been doing different systems. We've done little patch cuts. We've done higher retention, small cut blocks, and we've done some thinning projects. Everything in forestry is kind of geared towards bigger projects, you know, it's like thousands and thousands of cubic meters, thousands of hundreds of logging truckloads. So when you're doing everything on a small scale, it makes it really expensive. And, you know, contractors are not accustomed to working that way. They're not set up for that. The equipment's not set up for that. Even the reporting system with the Ministry of Forests in terms of submitting your results and your all the things that you've done for your silviculture, doing a thinning or doing a lighter touch has resulted in us having to develop our own set of standards that we've worked with the ministry for 5 years to get a set of standards that were acceptable. It certainly doesn't go as far as we'd like, but it allows us to do sort of the smaller selective logging projects. But the big challenge is one of the big challenges is financial. trying to make small scale light touch forestry financially viable. You know, the benefit to the island is we get logs to our local mills. The local mills can make paneling and flooring and lumber, and people can build with that on Cortez, and we can sell it off the island. So there's some economic benefit there. There's some, you know, an up and coming logging industry. One of the participants I see is one of the logging contractors on Cortez here today. And so we're making starting to build a bit of a viable logging industry, not year-round work, but you know, everybody does a little bit of this and a little bit of that with their equipment and other things, but we're still starting to build an industry there. The other big challenge though is social license and public perception, because, you know, on Cortez, we have a very conservation focused group, and there's been quite a bit of anti-logging protests in the past against large, you know, majors who had, you know, land holdings here and who would propose to come in and log, you know, 10 times, literally 10 times, 1,000% more than our typical project size. And so the community's blockaded against that and really, you know, united, obviously not 100% of the people, but I can share a little anecdote. If I go into the Cortez Cafe to have lunch, I can be standing in the lineup and a person will come up to me and say, you know, look, you guys are logging too much. You know, we don't want to have logging on Cortez. This is a tourism island, and we shouldn't be cutting the forest down, or, you know, we shouldn't be cutting as much down. And they go off on their way. And then the next person who comes to stand beside me in the lineup, literally, this happens multiple times, say, you know what, you guys need to log more. You need to make more profit. You need to have bigger openings. You need to have bigger clear cuts and da 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 da. So hopefully it means that we're somewhere in the middle, and that might mean that we're doing a pretty good job. I think that Cortez is probably 2/3 conservation focused and 1/3 would prefer us to log more. So in terms of solutions or lessons learned, or something that I would share with others, it's if we can be strong as a community, we can hold together and continue doing what we're doing. And if the ministry asks us to log more, we come under pressure to log more, we come under financial pressure for whatever reason, one of the partners or otherwise. You know, if we have broad-based community support and we engage with the neighbors in each area that we operate, and we hear their concerns and bring in their local knowledge and their perspectives, and we can make the projects work for the neighbors and work for the water community and address people's concerns. You know, it's a lot of time. I put a lot of time into meeting with people and talking to people and trying to hear, you know, build a consensus. And by doing that, and maybe what I should have said right off the bat is that we are a 50-50 partnership with Klahoose. So there's no consultation with the local First Nation. Like the local First Nation is a 50-50 partner in the partnership. And I correspond with the chief and the representatives from the Klahoose on an almost daily basis. So that level of cohesion really makes the project viable. It helps build trust between the native and non-native community. And it does it in a way that's really powerful, I think, for the Klahoose First Nation, because, you know, it's not a bunch of meetings and ceremonies where we're trying to talk about reconciliation. We're actually doing it. We're actually working together to manage the resource for the benefit of the wider island. But, you know, the Klahoose First Nation has a seat at the table and gets 50% of the profits.
That's really inspiring. I know, you know, from based on previous conversations, the business model is challenging, but it's heartening to see that, you know, it's basically on a bit of an uptrend in terms of how it's working. And, you know, it's, yeah. And I know that a carbon price of $160 a ton versus 35 or whatever it is now is also going to help if our government, our federal government actually implements it. So there are some questions rolling in the chat. We're going to move along, maybe tighten things up. We need 2 hours. Can we have 2 hours, please, Mitch, for this conversation? But we don't have that. So I'm going to move on to Chris Hall and talk about what some of the, I mean, you're fresh from this pilot. So tell us what are the warts and the bruises that you saw, and what will it take to build a very strong connection? Social license, I don't think is so much a problem. It's more, you know, the funding, the public funding we're going to need to make this fly.
Yeah, like you said, it just kind of wrapped up less than 2 weeks ago, so we're still kind of delving into the data here and going through all that. But yeah, definitely some interesting takeaways from that. Like I mentioned, I was surprised that the locals were using it far more than tourists we found, and people on the islands using it to explore, which I think is great as well. But yeah, Saturdays were far busier than Sundays, and lots of sort of interesting things like that. And we actually contracted Gulf Islands Water Taxi, that's an existing water taxi company, to actually do the operation of the boats. So we'll actually be announcing this week that we'll be promoting their sort of alternate school runs as an option for Aqualink for people to use it during the week as well on those sort of empty runs. So I think that's another good environmental things as well. Those boats are already running in that direction. So if we can encourage people to take those boats in the opposite direction as opposed to taking their cars to the other islands and use that as well, I think that's a benefit too. Yeah, from the summer pilot, or sorry, September pilot, I think one of the things we tried to do as well was really go into the hubs of each island. So it wasn't your sort of typical drop-off spots that Gulf Islands Water Taxi would do, or most operators would use, to get people into those main hubs where they could either walk around and didn't need automobile transit, or where there were spots where bike rentals and kayak rentals were available, just to really encourage people just to be able to walk around and hop into Ganges and go to the farmers market and shop local without bringing their cars with them to the island.
Yeah, and so I mean, you talked about sort of the destinations, the places where the boats would meet. I experienced that personally when I chose Galiano intentionally because we were pedestrians, so we got to walk to the provincial park there with a kid. So so it needed to be quick. So what do you think is necessary on the receiving side? You know, we'll talk about vision a bit later, but what are some of the things that you think need to happen to make it easier for folks on the other side? Is there enough taxi service, for example, on the other side to meet people, to be able to explore other parts of the island or do their business or deliver goods?
Yeah, taxis have been a bit of a struggle during the pandemic. So I know on a number of the islands, but the one on Pender sold their license and is not operating here anymore. So there's no taxi on Pender. One of the other positive things that's kind of going on right now as well is the CRD is actually doing a big multimodal transportation study as well, which includes the water transportation that hopefully will eventually tie into this, as well as foot trails and bike trails, as well as community buses. So looking at it sort of as a whole picture operation, which I think will be good, because trying to do them all separately or having those missing links kind of obviously creates issues. So be able to have it eventually where that all ties in together, between be able to hike around the islands and have trails that are all connected, or being able to use community buses once you arrive as well will be a huge benefit. So that's a survey's out actually right now if people are interested to get input on that, and that will be sort of putting together I guess a funding proposal that will go in the referendum next fall. So wonderful. Excited to see that going on as a sort of whole picture thing as well.
Yeah, put that, if you have the link handy, put that in the chat, please, Chris.
Yeah,
I personally would love to participate. Yeah, there's so much there, but in the interest of time, and thank you, we actually, our teacher gave us an extension. Thank you, Mitch. We've got a few more minutes to talk, but let's keep moving along. Maybe Jason, you know, there's sort of an angle here that's related. I mean, we're talking about tourism as well, although, you know, most of the visitors, the majority of visitors were locals, but I was a tourist in Galiano for half a day, and it was quite awesome. So tell us about what you've experienced. I mean, all of us have had COVID challenges, but my God, tourism and hospitality, it's been bullseye on those sectors. So tell us about how that went for you, and you know, what struggles there have been in terms of doing the pivot that you're trying to do with your business.
Yeah, if there's a pandemic coming, don't get into a business where you put a bunch of people into a confined space. So I was pretty much shut down for 2020. I had a little bit where we were getting going again towards the end of the season, where we did what we call bubble tours, so people traveling as family groups or otherwise already in contact with each other, and would leave some space between. So we'd use the largest van, put some space between the driver and the group, wearing masks, all the rest of it. And then this year we were shut down till June, and then we sort of did a bunch of the bubble tours again, and yeah, it's been up and down. It's been a bit of a disaster. The government funding was definitely helpful. What I did at first, as a self-employed person, I was allowed to apply for the employment benefits, which I did for a short time. Then I started up, I figured I've got my van sitting at the property doing nothing, and there's farmers that aren't getting to market. They need to get their produce out. There's people that don't want to go to stores. So I started a delivery service, which is more of wasn't really a moneymaker, it was more of a community service. So it was just something I could do with my vehicles to kind of help out. From that point of view, wasn't economically viable. So when I was able to reopen, I did, and it's been sort of stepping. So this year, my gross revenue is on track to be about half as much as 2019. Up until 2019, for about 5 years straight, I was getting 40% busier each year. So that was a big adjustment to go from that sort of growth down to a loss. So definitely it was helpful. I was able to get a loan and a grant to help me through the COVID stuff. And just doing what I do, I interacting with the other tourism operators and just seeing what they're experiencing. For the accommodations, actually, where they had a time that they were completely shut down, but they bounced back pretty easily because people can leave the key on the doorstep and clean the place up after. They don't need to interact with people. So there was definitely winners and losers across the tourism spectrum, as well as other businesses. If it wasn't for the loans and the grant I was able to access, I probably would have walked away from the business and gone back to something else, because it's, yeah. But I think I know when things come back to more normal, there's a big demand, and that's where we're trying to pivot and get things lined up. So when that demand comes back, we're not all going mental on a Saturday and try to spread things out and have things so it's getting away from the quantity sort of mindset in tourism and more into quality. So having people stay here longer and doing more things and hopefully repeat. So I'd like to see some. And I've been surprised, actually, in my business when I first started doing it. My assumption was, it's not really a repeat thing. People take a tour of the island and they may come back again, but they took the tour, they're not going to do it. But I've actually had a lot of people repeat. And now as we're adding more things for people to do, that's something that I'm hoping, and I'm seeing more people wanting to come back and do something else the next time. And also we've been having more and more success with local folks who are taking our wine tour, taking the sightseeing tour, and we've with the contacts that I have on the island, we can take people in behind the scenes and see what some really interesting people are doing here. So it's a way that even locals who have heard of these people doing these neat things don't really have access, because not everyone's got a storefront and can handle people coming in and wasting their time if they're busy doing their art or whatever it is that they do. So we're designing it that we can schedule those folks in and build in payment for them, so they get compensated for their time, and sort of spread the wealth that way, and yeah, make things a little more holistic as well.
It's really exciting. I mean, it brings to mind the notion of locavore tourism. Basically, and during COVID, I think I've been thinking way less about Mexico, way more about Vancouver Island. And it's where we need to go in terms of smaller footprints. When I do my best at home, but as soon as I take a plane, my carbon footprint goes through the roof. So yeah, thank you. It's inspiring, and I know you and I will be continuing the conversation around what we do on this island with respect to education. And we'll get into a question about vision, and won't have as much time as we did with this question. But on this question, maybe Faye and Michelle, you're involved in a similar initiative, so feel free to kind of go back and forth like seaweed in the conversation. So yeah, what have been the challenges for C2C, and and some of the good innovations that you feel proud of?
Yeah, I think what we'll start with is the local government regulations, because that, especially with the building, we got stuck with a few challenges around that. One of them was that we're zoned as a recycling center. But the planner just indicated that in a recycling center, you cannot repurpose materials. You actually can only take them in and then ship them off somewhere. We were allowed to have a shredder, but we weren't actually allowed to repair or repurpose. So we ended up, the trustees were great, and they pushed to have a bylaw amendment happen. So it's been in the works for a couple of months now, and we should have a bylaw amendment by the end of November. In the meantime, our building needs to be, our permit application needs to reflect the old way until that actual bylaw amendment goes through. The RD, Regional District, which is the permit, does the building permits for us. We had wanted to do a lot of recycling materials in the building, and apparently that's a no-go. In particular, windows and doors. We had been collecting different windows and doors that had come into the depot that we could use in the building, but apparently the windows actually need the sticker on them. So it doesn't matter if they're sealed, all the rest of it. So we're going ahead indicating that we're putting new windows in, but what we're going to be doing is working with the Waste Management Division, talking to the Building Permit Division to see whether or not we can make some changes by the time we actually start building, which might be another several months, because there's a 16-week wait for building on Gabriola. Michelle, do you want to go into some of our other challenges? Or
Yeah, sure. I think another standout is because we're trying to create a whole different model, a circular model for this waste stream, and that we haven't got any template to work from. We did so much research across, around the world, but even to try and find something in BC or Canada that was doing something similar, and there's literally nothing. So, we're really working just on, our own sort of analysis of what we have on Gabriola. We analyzed the waste stream to determine what kind of fiber it was that was being donated each week. And from that, we've determined, nearly 45% of the waste stream is polyester or a poly blend. And a lot of that material is really not very attractive fiber to turn into something unless we shred it. And so the shredding component became really obvious quite early on, that we were going to have to be shredding, almost 50% of the waste stream. So then we needed to find, well, what could we use this shredded material in? And so we partnered up with a professor from BCIT who's been doing a research grant with her student to work out how to use shredded fiber as in an acoustic sound panel. So she's been doing testing for about the last 6 or 7 months, and we have to really narrow it down to what size of shred is going to work in a baffle in these panels that will capture the most sound, and what density of shred. And so we can't even order the shredder until we've determined the tooth size configuration for the shred size that we need. So that's been an ongoing challenge, because it's taking such a long time to get that information really clear. But it's such important information, because the acoustic sound panel, just one panel, like a 2 foot wide by 4 feet long, can hold up to 30 pounds of shredded material in weight. And so in terms of potential to use a large quantity of textile waste, the acoustic panel it's just got a huge potential. So that's been a pretty big challenge. Another one has been just engaging the Gabriola community. They've been so excited to really brainstorm solutions with us, and invested in trying to keep this waste stream on the island and really turn it into a viable, sustainable business. So keeping them engaged, keeping them passionate about this initiative. We've held a fashion show event. We've held several events now throughout the last year to really keep them on top and updated with what's happening with the project. And it's exciting, but it's another level of work and PR and articles, and just community engagement is takes energy. Engaging further afield with the local district, getting buy-in with key stakeholders in the district, I think has been so important for this project. For any community wanting to try and keep hold of that textile waste stream, I really recommend that they do the same thing. Speak to your district, get aligned with their vision of waste diversion, which I would say most districts on Vancouver Island are doing just that. So, getting that buy-in with key stakeholders is really essential. And, the RDN for us have been a huge supporter already for this project.
Yeah, I think I want to move Salt Spring up to RDN. It's not like the CRD, but I think it's a little less sclerotic, to be quite frank. So yes, and it is a big lesson. I mean, the big thing you said I captured here, no templates. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I think of you, Mark, too, and there are no templates here. So there's the leading edge, then there's what people call the bleeding edge, and I think you're all on it right now in terms of the work. So we only have a couple of minutes left, so we're gonna kind of do popcorn around from each of you around, what's your vision, what the radical vision you want to see. So in 2070, what does your economy look like on your island, for example? And we've talked about various things this morning. We've talked about a circular model, manufacturing, cradle to cradle. I love that. We talked about local connectivity with Chris and the Aqualink, and we've got smaller orbits we're making now. So beefing up our connections like this, in fact, and ferries is great, and experiential tourism too. I mean, it's not about quantity, and the number of people who come to the island and buy placemats, candles, and a bunch of carrots. I mean, maybe we should rethink that. So what is maybe starting with Chris, what should Pender look like in 2070 from an economic and community point of view? I don't want to separate those.
That's a loaded question, eh?
Yeah, it is, in 2 minutes.
I think that's like you said, it's all about sort of being circular and tying things all together, and kind of, I think, being responsible for like things like your waste, and not just shipping that off to be someone else's problem, and taking accountability for that. And whether it's your carbon emissions or your garbage or your recycling, and just making sure we kind of keep that in a circular model. I know one of the things I talked about with you earlier is sidetracked here, but my girlfriend and I did an experiment this year to only eat what we could catch, grow, harvest, and raise for an entire year. And that was a really eye-opening experience for us, and just in kind of that circular model of making sure we use everything that we use, and how to put that back into our garden or our little permaculture ecosystem here. So using, the bones from our chickens to make bone meal for the garden, and using seaweed, and just sort of tying that all in together. And and being accountable for your waste, not buying packaged goods from the grocery store. It was amazing how much that dramatically reduced our waste that we created from not buying packaged food goods. So I guess everyone just taking accountability and kind of creating that circular model for sustainability.
Yeah, look up Chris Hall on CBC News. I think there are probably still articles there about their journey. It's quite awesome. Mark, over to you. What's the big hairy beast look like in 2070?
Well, it's hard to say what it's going to look like in 2070. With respect to forests, I think that we need to try. It kind of ties into the buy less and less is more kind of movement. If everybody's going to have a 3,000 or 4,000 square foot house and a 2,000 square foot guest cabin somewhere else, it takes a lot of wood to build that. And a lot of people here on Cortez live in super drafty houses that burn a huge amount of firewood. There's one house on Cortez, they burn 10 cords of firewood in the wintertime. So just the amount of firewood that's used on the island is tremendous. Passive heat pumps are pretty effective, but yeah, we're trying to do a little bit more with less. Recycle wood, try to repurpose old structures, and not necessarily always be building new things, but it kind of applies to concrete and iron and steel and the whole thing, using less natural resources.
Great, that's awesome. And I think that ties into Faye and Michelle. I mean, want to riff off that and build on the vision?
Yeah, I think I will just kind of repeat what the other guys have said. I mean, for Gabriola, working at the recycling depot, to see the volume of materials coming through. So I would love to see the community really embracing the mindset of living with less. So reduction strategies for all of your different materials, not using, like you're saying, buying package free if you can, or, more bulk buying opportunities, and anything that we do have that's waste, keep it local and turn it into something else. I think a lot of that has to really be supported by a lot of raising awareness and education within the community, and I think that's a key part for people really changing consumer behavior. So I think that has to go hand in hand with whatever sort of infrastructure you create.
Yeah, and I think there's a group on Gabriola called Island Futures, and they've got a vision statement that I think, to me, kind of epitomizes what we're trying to get at. Island communities that are self-sufficient, the local social and economic systems providing enough food, water, power, shelter, and I added and clothes for its population, who live in ways that preserve and protect the natural ecological system while respecting the diversity of lifestyles. And I think if you start with that, and then everything kind of flows from that. So it's everything from using your waste vegetable oil to put in your buses or to put in your tourism things, or reusing your waste textile, so-called waste textile, or growing all your own food. Everything kind of flows from that.
That's great. Jason, you want to round us out? And maybe we have time for one, I'll sort of rephrase a couple of the questions that have come in and just get a bit of a chat. Yeah, unless Mitch tells me we don't have time, but go for it, Jason.
Sure. Yeah, I would love to see the islands be self-sufficient as much as possible, and also like to see the islands get more stabilized in terms of the housing. Yeah, we don't need a lot more, big mansions on the waterfront. We need to keep the islands a place where we have a healthy arts community, and people who are in the arts and performing, or small scale farming can make a decent living and can afford to live here. I think that's my biggest worry over the next few years, is it's just becoming impossible for those types of people to find housing here. So if that can be solved and then that's stabilized, I think that would be a big thing. I'd love to see less smoke in the skies over the ferries as they come and go, and hopefully the people on the ferries are more on foot, and there is effective and efficient transportation getting them away from wherever they're coming, and it's something workable so that they don't feel that they need to bring their vehicles with them. So yeah, those are sort of a few of the things. I could go on forever, but that would be great to see, and great to see things, in the tourism world become more steady state, and that we know what's happening and what the future is bringing, and we can plan for it and make sure the infrastructure can manage it and all the rest of that.
Yeah, great. So many ideas here. Again, it has me thinking of basically archipelago radio station where we do podcasts once a month to bring together people like you to talk about big ideas like this, and share those ideas across the islands. It's wonderful. So yeah, maybe I'll just stop there. A lot of stuff on policy coming in the questions, but I think time's up, and I want to hand it back to Mitch. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Bryan, and there is actually an island radio station attending here. We, as part of the promotion for this forum, we were on Cortez Radio, and Amanda, I think, is not sure. Oh, yeah, she is here. Yeah, there she is. She did a great recording of us. So, yeah, I think that idea of doing more of this kind of storytelling would be great. Thank you so much, Bryan, and the rest of the panel. And I want to say thank you to the Island Coastal Economic Trust for sponsoring this part of our forum. We don't have time to field any questions, but I welcome everybody to follow up with the panelists individually if they want to. We've shared their contact info in the chat, and it's also in the contact document that we're sharing. Just two things I wanted to highlight there from the great amount of chat that was going on. There was great discussion going on there. There was that the need for a kind of new language, and that I think you really helped us provide, this idea of talking about things in circular ways rather than closed, which has kind of this negative impact, this circular economy. I think a lot of people found that really helpful. And that really all of you seem to be providing a kind of template for other people to get inspired from and learn from. And that to me is the most exciting part of what we're doing here together, is really trying to share what we're doing with each other in a way that's going to seed and spread this good work. So thank you again to all our panelists. Let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much.